I spent a few hours in the streets of Moscow today trying to make my way to the protests. As you alluded to in your intro, the center of Moscow was effectively militarized today, with police blocking off a lot of central avenues, placing a pretty wide cordon around the initial area of the protest around Lubyanka Square, the headquarters of the FSB, the former KGB from Soviet times, that Navalny and his supporters had initially suggested would be the kind of heart of today's protest. That became impossible with iron barricades and riot police, making that site essentially inaccessible for everyone, not just for protesters. And those sorts of tactics we saw throughout the center of Moscow. Police everywhere, barricades everywhere, difficult to not just drive through the city, but to walk through the city. So in the end, there were scattered pockets of protesters in lots of different locations, people who weren't necessarily able to link up in one big group, but groups of dozens of people, hundreds of people moving from one location to the next. As we speak, a large group of protesters has made their way by foot toward the jail where Navalny is being held while awaiting trial, Matrosskaya Tishina. The arrests are ongoing. There were arrests throughout the day. I saw arrests myself as I was making my way among these various crowds, trying to follow the crowds as they moved around the city. There was a heavy police presence, and certainly it seemed like essentially by random protesters were being targeted, certainly those who ended up in any sort of confrontation or clash with the police, but also those standing around. I saw one young man who looked to be a teenager who was standing all by himself in a small square away from the main protest action, and riot police came up to him and took him away for arrest. So a pretty chaotic day, I think, in Moscow and in other protest areas and cities around the country.
Interesting for us on the outside to know here, how's this being discussed in Russia, on Russian media right now? What's the sentiment within the country towards what's playing out?
Well, what's interesting is that we've seen the Kremlin and Putin himself address Navalny and Navalny's accusations for the first time really ever. There was this very high-profile, more than 100 million views on YouTube investigation that Navalny released about so-called Putin's palace, lavish luxury residence on the Black Sea. And Putin felt compelled to address those accusations and certainly to deny them and to dismiss them. But nonetheless, that's the sort of engagement that we haven't seen before. The Kremlin, in particular, Putin's strategy for many years has been essentially to ignore Navalny, pretend he doesn't exist, pretend his investigations don't exist, and to not react or comment on them.
Along those lines, Josh, I want to ask you the million-dollar question. I mean, many internationally are left scratching our heads here, wondering what is the end game here for both sides. I mean, Navalny comes back knowing he's going into imminent detention, which he is, and then on the other side, he's been given this sort of platform throughout this whole saga here by Putin, and dealing with him and arresting him in such a high-profile manner here. Where's this going? What's the end game for both sides of this?
Well, I think you're right in identifying the dynamic that even though the state holds all of the formal power and has the ability to do things like arrest Navalny immediately upon his arrival and put him into jail, Navalny has been able to direct and determine the narrative to a remarkable degree from jail. And I think that shows that however skewed the balance of formal power is, Navalny and his supporters are able to maintain some momentum and direction over events all the same. I don't think this comes to any quick resolution. I don't think the end game is something we'll see this week, next week, or even this year. I think this is now a medium and long-term, really, struggle we're going to see play out over many months. Many people are looking toward parliamentary elections in Russia in September, so there might not be really a clear indication of what will the political result of these current protests be for some time. I don't think that either side has the ability to land the sort of blow on the other that would neutralize or knock it out for good right now. The protesters have shown that they're, despite police pressure and administrative pressure, able and willing to come out week after week, but not in a way that gets Navalny, say, freed from jail tomorrow, or in some way, overthrows the Putin system. I think that all of those are pretty, at this point, distant and unlikely goals. So I think instead what we're going to have is this struggle and battle of wills that plays out over many weekends to come. I don't think this is far from the last protest of its type we'll see in Russia in this season.